So, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you had a nice lunch. I'm standing right like as if it's an inquisition here. This is lights. Now we're going to continue with something much more on the other side of the scale, not hardcore sciences, but the humanities. We're going to hear some different aspects of language technology and censoring and what the humanities in general are looking for when getting services from infrastructure providers, somewhat like myself. And the question, of course, is what can we do for them, and what do they ask from us, and how do we make it work? Because for infrastructure providers, it is indeed something pretty new to move into the humanitarian area and the social sciences. It has been, for the last 20, 30 years, it has been, I would say, 99% focused on natural science. But those days are over, and for many good reasons. And of course, for the top strategic reasons that modern society has to have a complete digital infrastructure for all its science, and indeed many of these sciences, they have embraced these technologies, though the needs and the ways of doing so are somewhat different, and it is our task to learn how this is different and how we should adapt such that we become good infrastructure providers for these other scientific areas. So, Stefan Opan, please, the floor is yours to give the first case. And after we've had our three presentations, we will form a little panel. Then we will try to conclude what exactly is it that is asked from the infrastructure providers. How do we progress from there on? Thank you. The word is yours.
I assume the microphone is on. Thank you, René. Thanks to the Nike organizers for bringing us together here today. With this introduction, I guess part of my mission is to try and make the case to you that there is hard science in the humanities, or relevant science, and that for me it's been very beneficial to use large-scale e-infrastructures, high-performance computing. And so part of my mission is to convince others, scholars in the humanities maybe, or other disciplines, with not much of a tradition of high-performance computing use, that there may be something for you too. And last but not least, my message to the providers of these infrastructures, maybe take us serious, invite us in. But I'll also try to give you some idea of what my discipline actually is about. It's called language technologies, or computational linguistics, or natural language processing. It used to be very difficult to explain what we actually do. I had to invoke science fiction, and after a while my students were no longer getting the reference. I assume many people in the audience do. But it's gotten a lot easier to explain what language technologies are in the past 5 years. We all use them often. This is Google Translate. Not sure it's readable in the back. Gravlaks is a Nordic tribunal consisting of raw salmon that has been marinated. So actually a helpful translation, but far from a perfect translation. This is language technologies. Made available to everyone by companies like Google and Microsoft. Currently, or nowadays, it's, I think, virtually impossible to offer a web search engine without a translation service. I was trying to get to Rockheim last night. Siri was not very helpful, so I said, where is Rockheim in Trondheim? And I don't have Carmen in my address book. So what we now sometimes call the conversational user interfaces, may in some settings provide a useful alternative to graphical user interfaces. Some of you may have heard the buzz about the IBM Watson system in 2011. They put together this computer system that answered questions in the US TV show Jeopardy, and actually managed to outperform the longtime champions. So reasonably large computer with access to a broad collection of knowledge, lots of it from Wikipedia, and the ability to answer questions in natural language. So all of these are language technologies, and they're culturally and economically relevant in what we sometimes call the knowledge, what used to be the information society. By now, about less than 1/3 of the web online content is in a language that we understand. So there you immediately see why translation is a core business for Google nowadays. It's all about processing language. Language is the fabric of the web, so they are data intensive. There are large volumes of natural language text or natural language data. It can be speech in the Siri example. And they are inherently computationally demanding. And I believe, so I'm presenting today from the perspective of language technologies, but helping Google improve their services. But in some of my projects, I'm actually working as a computational linguist, helping advance our understanding of natural languages. So there's the connection to the digital humanities. Many of the tools we develop have immediate applications in linguistics, the philologies, but also political science or law, the humanities and social sciences. Why is it a hard problem? We usually don't think about it, but language is very ambiguous. Unlike a programming language, a simple sentence can have many different interpretations. And that is actually an important property of natural languages, of human languages, because it reduces the size of the code. So we are able to talk about a very large complexity with a relatively limited code. This is from a translation system we built at the University of Oslo some years ago. And our system comes up with 25 different candidate translations for this simple sentence. And if you start thinking about them, they're all possible. I mean, some are much more plausible than others. Mood can be against or towards. Road can be path, Vei can be path or road, and andre can be other or second. There are also ways of reordering things in English that have the same meaning, but maybe communicate a different nuance in the signal. And so that's ambiguity. It's essentially a search problem. It can be a very large search problem, and that's why natural language processing is difficult. These are scraped off the internet. The first one is Google. It's not perfect. It's pretty good, but Way, I think, is mostly used in the, I did it my way, not in the sort of physical road or path venue. This is the only commercial system that you can buy for Norwegian, or could buy 5 years ago, for Norwegian to English machine translation and install on your desktop. I believe it's clear that the Norwegian market is not their prime market. This is to motivate why we're still researching on the problem, even though Google has put out a fairly useful tool. In the next 5 minutes, I'll try to give you some idea of some of the core problems, some of the methods, technologies, algorithms, challenges. And you're familiar with grammars, Bacchus-Nauer form grammars of programming languages, let's say. The key difference is that a simple sentence like Kim shot deer in socks has two candidate interpretations. Kim was in socks doing the shootings, or there were actually deer in the forest that were out and about in socks that day. And these correspond to two different syntactic analyses, two different parse trees using this simple grammar, grossly simplified grammar of English. And so the parsing problem is to enumerate all analysis trees that satisfy those conditions. And then that is the syntactic analysis, and that's a tool to us towards actual interpretation, semantic analysis. So what we maybe find more rewarding is some representation of meaning in a kind of logic. This is a variant of predicate calculus. And if you squint, I've highlighted the important part. So the in relation, the binary relation holding between two things where something is in x15, the socks, and that can be either the event E2 of shooting, or it can be the instance x9, the deers. So here we see how the difference in syntactic structure projects into a difference in logical form. And this is the kind of meaning representation that computers then can use to reason over, or that we can use in knowledge discovery. So that's very simplified syntactic semantic parsing, one of the areas of specialization in our research group at Oslo. There are two different analyses, so how do we choose? And that's where probabilities are our best tool to date to rank competing analyses. And imagine we knew that there were these three different sentences of English, and these were the sort of most common, the correct analyses, the intended analyses. Then, given that data, I could estimate the probabilities for each of the individual rules of the grammar. I could say, well, it's 2 out of 4 cases that I see the category VP, verb phrase, dominate VP, PP, and it's only 1 out of 4 cases that I see VP dominate V and P. And so that gives me an immediate estimate of conditional probabilities for these rules. Then I can put these together and I have a very simple, badly simplified model of a probability distribution over the different syntacto-semantic analyses. And these we train from, well, more complicated models than these. We train from what we call tree banks, collections of strings, natural language utterances that one way or another are paired with the intended, the correct analysis. And that pairing can be either manually, we pay linguistics students to come up with or maybe select the right interpretation among a set of candidates, or there are also methods for bootstrapping these tree banks. But either way, at the end of the day, a very big part of language technologies today are statistical models, and typically in all systems, even Google Translate, which is very strong on the statistics, it's trained on massive volumes of parallel text. So Google harvests from their web crawls likely pairs of documents that are translations of each other. They also have access to Google Books and various other available parallel corpora. And then on those, they train probabilities of this word corresponding to this word, or even this phrase, sequence of words corresponding to this one. They further train models of what are likely strings in the target language. So what is a likely sequence of words in, say, English? And those they train on pretty much all the data they have available, parallel text, and can handle with reasonable complexity. But even there, and much more so in a system like Siri or the IBM Watson system, there are also symbolic elements. So I showed you this very simple context-free grammar using categories S and P. In reality, those categories have internal structure. They have maybe, so they're directed acyclic graphs. There's a notion of unification. They have about 400 nodes each. And to analyze a single sentence, 20-word sentence, we use about 10 CPU seconds. And you might think, well, you better put more effort into your program. We've done that. This is a program that has been optimized. So there are pieces in assembly. It's been optimized down to the level of thinking about cache line sizes. Admittedly, about 8 years ago for the last time. So we should probably redo that. But this is fairly carefully optimized software. These are mature codes, and still there is tremendous or large computational cost in analyzing a single sentence using these models. Combine these with statistical probability distributions. As I already said, some language technologies are very strong on the statistical parts. All are in one sense or another hybrid, and we're not using the simple context-free estimation model I showed you for syntactic trees. We're using discriminative advanced sequence labeling or structured prediction models, conditional random fields or maximum entropy models. What is special about, this is an emerging discipline called machine learning or statistical learning theory. What is special about applications to natural language is that we often have very large parameter spaces. We have very high dimensional models, and that translates into very large, sparse matrices and vectors. And we also have pretty large data sets. So the probability of what is a a plausible sequence of words in English, for example, we routinely estimate from about 1 trillion words of English. That's data that Google actually has released from a web crawl. It's, and cleaned to a certain degree. And this is the kind of data we have to actually use in our models to be competitive. So that's where the relatively large-scale computation enters the scene for us. To try to sort of give a very high-level classification of some of the techniques, sort of summing up what are core technologies, core methods in language technologies. Many of our subproblems are embarrassingly parallel. So the syntactic, semantic analysis of a single sentence, we make that independent of the preceding or the following sentence. And that means it's embarrassingly parallel. Many of our subproblems are relatively hard on the memory subsystem. And some also ask for what not so long ago I would have considered insane amounts of main memory. So we are happy users of the 1 terabyte nodes that have been installed as part of the ABEL cluster recently. And it actually turned out that something where a master student had been banging his head on the wall for about a month. So trying to scale the problem size, eliminate parameters, apply cutoffs to the training data so that he could fit into our 256 gigabyte node at the time and try to get some results. And it was very rewarding, I guess, liberating for this project to actually say, well, I no longer need to do that. I can now allow myself 800 gigabytes of memory, and then sort of this very expensive manual chipping at the problem to fit it, shoehorn it into the available computational infrastructure is greatly reduced. Of course, well, you might also wonder, does this lead to lazy science, and will we just continue using up whatever we can get our hands on? And probably the answer is yes. So there's an interesting methodological reflection here. So to give you one concrete example of a project, so essentially my showcase example for the messages I'll propose. Wish my timer. So something that we've been doing over the past 3 or 4 years is to process the English Wikipedia to make it more useful to us and also others. So view Wikipedia as a corpus, as a collection of text that contains a lot of knowledge encoded in natural language form, and make that knowledge more accessible. And there are a number of research applications to that kind of resource. We're doing this in a collaboration with, among others, Stanford University in the US, and build on a pre-existing tool that we had jointly been developing for almost the past 2 decades. So for the complete Wikipedia, we make available to the community, well, classic parse trees. The formal syntacticians, linguists, find that a very interesting representation. Representation of semantics, meaning representation in a form of logic. And the only thing if anything, I would ask you to observe here is the sentence is phrased in the passive. The song was covered. Now, if you wanted to answer the question, who covered that song, assuming you know that has a different structure. So the subject and the object, the thing preceding the verb and following the verb can be swapped around, but these have the same meaning. And so here in the level of semantics, we see that in the cover relation, so the event of covering holds between x11 and x5, and x11 is the composition of Harry and Nielsen. So Harry Nielsen does the covering, is essentially what we recover here. The covering was done by Harry Nielsen. Quantitatively, we extracted about 1.3 million content articles from Wikipedia. That translates into 55 million utterances, almost 1 trillion tokens. This is one of the larger existing electronic and freely available electronic corpora. And we had a coarse round of manual validation and concluded that there is reasonably high accuracy in the annotations. I mean, here, this is about volume. Not every single one is letter perfect, but there is reasonably high quality. And running our system on the complete Wikipedia translates to about 120,000 CPU hours. Not something I could sort of conceive doing on my workstation. I can currently execute that in about 2 days. Best I could do was 14 hours. That was right after Abel was set into production. That outputs about 200 gigabytes compressed data, and we version that and make available snapshots about once a year to the community. And so the CPU cycles we get through the Norwegian Nortur infrastructure, and the storage we get through the Noor store. So we're very, very happy customers. This has been picked up by a handful of research groups in the US, the UK, Germany, and put to use for various follow-on research initiatives. So the ability to complete this job has found customers. And this leads me to, so this ability to complete this job leads me to sort of looking back. Almost 10, so 8 years ago or so. So we used to spend project funds on compute servers, put those into the basement, and found we could never get enough project funds or space in the basement or compute servers. And obviously that was a drain on funds and time, and rack space and cooling were problematic, and we never really sort of put down the effort to optimize this infrastructure. And then 2007, 2008, I think, we came into contact with the HPC division at Oslo. I think initially I felt this is not for us, but then found out, well, maybe actually it is. And so we have since been migrating to using the clusters at Oslo, and have abandoned maintaining our own mini cluster in the basement. And sort of looking back then we were proud of this infrastructure. We thought, wow, we can go through 10,000 sentences in realistic time. And today we can run the full Wikipedia, 55 million sentences, about every other month is our current pattern. As we have improved the system, as we expect, we will learn something from doing this new run. And of course, Wikipedia is a small resource if you think of sort of web scale online content. So I think I'll actually skip over this one. This is just very briefly announcing an ongoing initiative at building a portal. So we're very happy with this development, and now we're building a portal or a science gateway to make it possible for others to also benefit from this kind of technology with a low barrier to entry. And that's part, I should say, that is funded by the Norwegian Clarin initiative and is attracting emerging collaboration with people in Sweden currently. So to sum up the 3 messages we are asked to bring to you, I look at this as a very happy tale. I'm very happy with this outcome. It's natural because the type of thing, the kind of research we do is inherently computational, inherently data-driven. But I think the profile of our research group at Oslo actually by now is shaped by access to these resources. And in fact, I believe that has made us internationally competitive. In some cases, we participated in system bake-offs. And our ability to turn around hundreds of experiments in, say, the matter of a day was something that not all participants, few of the participants actually had available. And often that means we land on a better total solution. So the message here is, I'm happy we no longer have compute nodes in our basement, and I believe that one should minimize the volume, the cycles in sort of custom local installations. I think one should try to federate and amass in large installations. I would expect most of you are quite happy with that message. The flip side of that is the human factor. We were, in a sense, pursued. I was surprised by the positive attitude that we found on the other side. There were people who were interested in getting us, signing us on as users. So something that I perceived as moderate affirmative action. We were warmly welcomed to the table. We've received advanced user support to improve, tune our tools for the national clusters. And we've received excellent technical support, so we're very happy campers. But I've also learned that not all of my colleagues meet the same attitude at their national or university computing centers, and so I think to get the equipment into your installation, you also need to welcome the users. So there's the sort of expectation that there's some interest in user diversity, even when they come from the computationally not sophisticated disciplines. Finally, this notion of HPC for the masses. I believe that for us, this scalability, the ability to go from something non-trivial to something reasonably large by our standards, transparently, sort of climbing our way upwards in the HPC pyramid, was a very important enabling factor. So I predict, and it's been said before, more and more disciplines will turn computational. There is I wouldn't hesitate calling it a paradigm shift going on. And I look at portals, science gateways, virtual research environments as an important tool to make that paradigm shift happen and successful. And I think that calls for increased attention to the technologies, but also the procedures, the policies around them. And that completes my message. And
thank you, Stefan. So, do we have some questions here? It's like you managed to get into the HPC world on the terms of the HPC world itself. So, congratulations for that. Yes, there's a question down here. Yeah, you need the mic.
Hello. You mentioned that your jobs were embarrassingly parallel. So I'm assuming that you were using, or you are using the standard batch systems of these clusters. But many of your colleagues who do sort of data mining and text processing on large data, they use MapReduce. Is that something you would see some benefits from? And how would you deal with that in a traditional cluster context?
well, the latter question I won't even try to speculate about. Well, you'd push the Hadoop modules, I guess. I've been wondering about that. So, I mean, many of my colleagues work at companies like Google. Google has a very large natural language processing department now, and there, of course, the MapReduce framework is the framework of choice. It's never been natural for us. Well, because it's not available, and I don't immediately see what we would gain for our application. So we had support for coarse parallelization from before, and it was relatively painless to sort of map that onto the queue system on these clusters. It's a question I don't think I can answer, but consider with interest.
Okay, thanks.
So I certainly wouldn't say that's irrelevant or uninteresting.
I'll just ask one question and then we'll move on. So could you explain to me, you said that it was a happy tale that you was like embraced by the infrastructure providers. But then again, you also said that some of your colleagues didn't have this experience. So can we take it that you were just lucky? If that is the case, how would you think it should be done? I mean, how should the infrastructure providers engage with the humanities in your experience?
I think
if it's not just to be left to the personal goodwill of some interested party.
I think we were fortunate in several ways. Fortunate that Norway has a relatively comfortable e-infrastructure available, has a policy of actually broadening the range of disciplines. That the group at our university sort of embraced that policy. So all of these were happy prerequisites. I think we also benefited from not coming from zero technical. I mean, I think the initial contact I don't really recall. So we were placing an order for 4 or so compute nodes. At the same time, the first Titan was being installed, and we were in touch with the guy who did the procurement. And that's how the idea sort of evolved. So all of these, I think, were positive sort of factors on the outcome. I think the human. I said human factor. I think I used interest in the end. I had considered respect, and that I think has to be mutual. Mutual interest, mutual respect. There has to be sort of the desire, but of course that desire maybe in some cases has to be created by increased knowledge about the possibilities. So.
Okay. Yeah, I take that as look into customer relations. Okay. Now we move on to Hans-Jørgen Marco, who's going to tell us something about data services, different infrastructure examples. So Hans, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I got the title Nordic Contributions to Developing a European Digital Service, Developing Digital Services Infrastructures for Social Science and Humanities. And let's see, yeah. I come from the Swedish National Data Service, and so what is that? The Swedish National Data Service, that's a data service. We work for social science, humanities, and medicine, and our purpose is to keep research data available and accessible for new research, and to extend advice to researchers on the usage of data on data resources in research. So we are placed in Gothenburg, and as the institution we were established in 2008, but before us there was another institution which only dealt with the social sciences, and that goes back to 1980. We are very much engaged in international cooperation because a national data service isn't such a big thing, and anyway, a lot of the things we do have an international angle. So these are some of the things that we take part in. Some of them are EU projects, some of them are associations, and one of them is a cost action, actually. That's No Escape. And in different ways, these international or European corporations support our activities and extend them to provide better services to the Swedish researchers. I'm going to tell you about some of these, and the rest of them you just enjoy the beautiful logos. The first of them that I'll tell you about is CESTA, which means Council of European Social Science Data Archives. We say data service in Sweden, but in Denmark they say data archive, data archive. That's essentially meaning the same type of institution, namely a data service which maintains research data for future use. CESTA is a European thing, and it has 23 countries represented, and if you count the little rectangles around the map, you find 21. Because the two last ones were only admitted to CESTA a month ago, and that's Portugal and Slovakia that are missing here. CESTA has been around for quite a long time. CESTA was founded in 1976 by the then existing 7 European data archives. And the cooperation has been very close through the years because there is a strong element of common interest between data archives. One area where CESTA has been active from the beginning is creating and standardizing metadata to social science data. The first standard that CESTA was initiating was a standard study description, which is study level metadata for social science data materials. And later on, CESTA was very much engaged in the creation of the documentation standard DDI, Data Documentation Initiative, which is now the present standard for documenting data resources. And DDI covers not only the study level, but goes down on the variable level and it describes the whole process from defining a research project until you have the data material and it's stored and maintained and go out in new secondary research. Another thing that CESTA has been doing is to put a strong emphasis on the exchange of knowledge and education of staff. We have seminars where we collect the staff from the data archives of Europe and go through particular subjects in dealing with data resources. And actually, as an outspring of that, eventually the EU discovered CESTA, and that was back in the mid 1990s, that we for the first time was successful in actually having EU funding for doing something useful. And the first useful thing we did was to develop a software which somebody labeled as the social science dream machine, where the general idea behind this software was that as a social science researcher should not only be able to discover a data material, but also to do at least explorative data analysis on the data material. And well, eventually that software has become Norwegian and now it's being maintained in Bergen. As a result of the S3 project, CESTA quite naturally became one of the S3s, and so CESTA got funding for generating the statutes and whatever for eventually creating what is now labeled as an ERIC. And in 2010, 11 countries signed an MOU for the creation of an ERIC, and for quite some time CESTA believed that we were going to be the first ERIC. But we had made a terrible mistake. We had decided that this ERIC had to be established in Norway. And that was impossible then. It is still impossible. But now we have decided on a workaround for this. And so the CESTA ERIC is going to not be established, but replaced on an interim basis by a Norwegian limited company, which will carry on the activities. And then when Norway finally gets into the ERIC regulation, we will move the activities of the AS into an ERIC. CESTA, well, the objectives of CESTA are as old as CESTA itself. So the language that this is expressed in is really very archaic. On the other hand, these objectives have been the basis of 37 years of very active cooperation between data infrastructures. So, well, what CESTA wants to do is to promote acquisition, archiving, and distribution of data throughout Europe, and promote projects and procedures for enhancing exchange of data and technologies among the data organizations. That is really the platform that has fused the cooperation of development of tools and methods and standards. And to stimulate the development and use of these procedures throughout Europe was really that was the spirit of cooperation that has maintained this through the many years, and it encouraged new data organizations. It's really been a hallmark of CESTA that we go out and encourage the establishment of new data organizations. One of the EU projects that was on my slide with all the logos was CESIDA, which is about creating data archives in the West Balkans. So we travel now to Sarajevo and Zagreb and Belgrade to persuade them that it's a good idea to have a national data archive. And of course to associate and cooperate and whatever. But the development of CESTA into a data infrastructure, we will continue and enhance the activities that we already have in creation of integrated research discovery tools. If you go into the web place cesta.org, you will find the CESTA portal, and in the CESTA portal you can actually discover social science data materials, and you can search in Danish and get results in Finnish. Not always very helpful, because the data material in Finnish that you find will still be documented in Finnish. So if you don't know what bicycling or tobacco smoking means is in Finnish, you will have some trouble analyzing it. But anyway, you can discover it. What we really want to develop further is that you can go not only and discover, but go into actually analyzing data. And for that you really need the single sign-on, and you need access protocols. We also, we want to extend our services and make them standardized and similar in the European countries. And we want to have a system of certification and auditing that controls that the level of service that is provided in the different European countries are on the same level. We want to educate our staff and transfer knowledge and whatever. And of course, standards developments have always been a central part of CESTA activities. And that is really what the CESTA ERIC that's really the purpose of the CESTA ERIC. We've gone some way towards creating the infrastructure that we wanted, but we feel that we need the common legal entity and a common governance structure and a central coordinating body in Bergen, and sustainable funding, of which, of course, the Norwegian puts up the major part. So that's a reason for wanting to have the center in Bergen. So this is all going to be established on the 18th of June this year. So we are very, very excited about this development of CESTA. CESTA participates in a project. The EU got the idea when back in 2011 that all those S3s, they wouldn't support them directly, but on the other hand, they would like to have some kind of construction where they could help them on a little bit. But it would be too complicated to fund all the 30 plus, and they also felt that some of them could benefit from cooperation. So they got the idea that they lumped them together in research areas. So social science and humanities was lumped together as a group, and that is the group So now I should be noisy again. DASH. DASH, that's a data service infrastructure for social science and humanities. And DASH is the second thing I'm going to say a few words about. DASH brings 5 of the S3s together to deal with the common challenges that faces us across disciplines and infrastructures. What we want to do is to find common solutions to common problems. And having those common solutions, we will provide a platform for international cooperation. And we got some money from the EU, and then the consortium was started with, actually it was started with 19 partners, and then when the contract was almost signed, 2 of them fused to one partner, which was quite annoying really. But anyway, now we have 18. And the common challenges that we are addressing is to achieve integration and interoperability across disciplines, and not only in the framework of the single projects. And manage and preserve data resources and research data, and come out of the only having download resources into the situation where you can actually use the resources online, improve data quality and cross-disciplinary access, and of course the whole issue of access conditions that is also which is very much in CESTA's interest, is also in a DASH's interest. And then having solved the issue of maintaining resources and having them available and providing access to them, what's the use of the whole thing if nobody wants them? So create the trust of the users so that this actually is regarded as useful for the social science and humanities researchers. The solutions are addressed in the way where you go out and look at what is it we actually have. What elements of data architecture do we have? What are the tools we have? What do we have in one S3 and miss in another one? So we do a mapping of the data and tools and infrastructure that we have. And we address some of the issues of data quality, especially metadata quality, and also issues of survey construction and so on. And we look at the criteria and the tools for data curation. And of course, there's the issue of access to data and trust domains and such. And then there's the whole big issue of legal and ethical issues, which is a big deal when dealing with personal data, and also when you have data resources that are where you have intellectual property rights. We have also a number of workshops and teaching materials we create, and then of course we have a dissemination part of this project. We are one of the activities is creating software for specific issues in data collection and and data coding, such as occupation coding and tools for questionnaire construction. And of course, we address metadata quality by exchanging knowledge and providing information material and courses. We have a tools directory, and we also set up a framework for testing of tools and develop some tools. And so then there is the issue of persistent identifiers, where we also try to address this. In legal and ethics, we have the issue of access to personal data and how to deal with the constraints to data resources of different kinds. And well, so essentially that is DASHISH. And this is a consortium, and so you can see what kind of a challenge I have to deal with here. This is the 19 partners. The 2 that merged are actually in 2 different infrastructures. Some of these are actually Nordic. The SND and the FSD and the NSD in the top row there are Sweden and Finland and Norwegian data archives, and the CPH and the UIB are in the Clarion in the bottom, are University of Copenhagen and University of Bergen, which are both involved in language computing. So that was DASHISH. Another thing that I would talk to you about briefly is another cooperation, which actually more or less is the other way around, where it's something that is generated especially in Germany and UK, where we benefit from participating in that. The idea of DataCite is actually that originally or traditionally publication and research data lived in their own separate worlds, and if they were at all maintained, that was a big thing. So the data centers and the publishers were each dealing perhaps with related information, but there's no connection between them. Sometimes you could create individual connections, but still again it would be quite difficult to bring data and the research based on the data together in a systematic way. And that is what DataCite is going to address, or is addressing, with a digital object identifier and a metadata structure connected to this, so that you systematically can go from publication to data and from data to publications. And in Denmark and in Sweden, we do have members of DataCite. In Sweden, it's SND who is the member, and Norway is still missing one, I believe. There was one of the DataCite people who suggested that Sweden should take over Norway, and I had to tell him that has been attempted unsuccessfully, and being a Dane working in Sweden, I would be the very, very wrong person to attempt a thing like that. So, essentially, there's a lot of things going on in the social science and humanities world, and we have been discussing this with the EC. I don't know if you have probably discovered that every February and March, you get a lot of questionnaires. And that's because a new group of EU projects are starting in January 1st. And all those EU projects are defined in the way where you start with sending out a questionnaire, then you write a report, then you develop a demonstrator of a software, and then you write another report, and then you collect the money. And that is not a bad idea if your project is successful. What is irritating with all those questionnaires you receive is that they're all about the same thing. So there are too many projects that are addressing the same issues in more or less the same way. And well, from the Dash's side, we are concerned about that, and the EC is concerned about that as well. So we have sent out an invitation to all the EU projects that are presently running in social science and humanities to come and visit us in Gothenburg in October. And then we hope that we can try to find a solution to this so that the money that goes from EU to social science and humanities projects are used for something new instead of solving the same old problems the same way once again. So that is something about data infrastructure and social science and humanities.
So, thank you very much. It seems like one more infrastructure provider in your arena is more like a headache than a solution. It seems you're dealing a lot with politics, consolidating, finding a common agenda and things like this.
I think that is very important because, well, we don't want to waste resources. There are really so many new problems we could address rather than the same ones again.
Yeah, okay. Right, any questions? Yes, there's one here. I wouldn't throw it. Bring it to you.
Yes, there seemed to be a wealth, an enormous number of, well, relatively big number of data infrastructure projects that each work at different levels. So you have, European ones. You have truly intercontinental initiatives like the RDA, and you have ones that are very discipline specific, and then you have groups of disciplines. And eventually, I wonder a little bit how this is going to contribute to standards. And if I may just take one example, you're involved in DataSite, and they decided to base their PID system on DOIs, whereas you also contribute to DASIS, in which Clarin has decided they will use handles. Yeah. Now, we know that the handle system is to a certain extent incompatible with DOIs because their definition of what a digital object is slightly different. Yep. And this reminds me of the map of the Japanese energy grid, which we saw earlier today. So, in other words, if we go on with like layers and layers of data infrastructures that each work somewhat independently of each other, where will we end up? And also, how related to that, how do you see the Nordic dimension in this?
Yeah. Well, you very correctly point to a very real problem. It isn't that if standards are good, double standards are twice as good. But on the other hand, sometimes it's true that standards can be complementary because they really don't deal with the same thing. But you pointed to an issue where they actually deal with the same thing. And, I don't have the solutions, quite frankly. I think the solution is organizational. It's about creating the cooperation between people that we level out all those different standards. So I really think the thing that points forward is to meet and talk about this and try to formalize cooperations. I don't see the Nordic as something opposed to the European and the truly international. I see it as levels of the same thing, and very often where I used to walk around, the Nordic is something informal that we do in the back room, and then we come out and go into the European, and that often works very well. The most places I am, half of the board are usually Scandinavians, so I think we're good at that, the informal thing. I think that's something Nordic that we should be proud of.
Okay, thank you very much. Political consolidation, I hear. Right, so our next speaker is Eric Champion, a colleague of mine from Denmark, somewhat in the same line of business, infrastructure provider, but solely for the humanities. And Eric will tell us a little about what he's doing in his shop.
Thank you.
Word is yours, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Right, so I'm a project leader for Digital DK in Denmark, which is relatively new. The Danish Ministry of Science, Innovation and Higher Education gave us generously 30 million Danish kroner, and 4 universities together gave 5 million over 5 years. It's not a project, I'm not allowed to call it a project, but in the next 5 years we will need more money. So my takeaway points here, I will say it again at the end, but from the humanities points of view, for those who have not been using computers directly beforehand, they have now discovered, and I am generalizing here, but they have now discovered that now they can make things digitally and virtually, and they can share things, and they can share the making of these things. And the second point is that compared to the humanities of 20, 30 years ago, now your audience is instant and international and multilingual. So there's a whole new way of communicating to the so-called audience. So I can't speak for computer science, but the notion of tools that you yourself can make and share, and tools that make tools, and then an audience who can interact with you at that tool level, I think that is new for humanities academics. And the final point, and this is a slight extension to what was said this morning, but if you get ERIC status, European Research Infrastructure status, then actually in that, and we belong to 2, or one that's already been ERIC approved and one that hopefully will be, you actually have to prove it's top-level research. So it's not enough to say you're a research infrastructure. For an ERIC, you have to say you're a top-level research infrastructure that attracts top-level research students. I don't know if digital humanities has been defined, and I'm not going to provide a definition, but if you're interested, at the top there, DH 2003, so it's a day in the life of a digital humanist. Over 300 or 400 people each year join it for a day, and they blog what they're doing, and they're asked to define digital humanities. And there's probably 300 or 400 definitions on this website. So it changes every year. But one of the more useful distinctions that I've heard is digital humanities servicing, computing for the humanists, or is it actually a paradigm shift for humanities scholars? As in, how will the digital change humanities? And I think it's actually kind of in between the two. The slide on the right is a student that I supervised 2 years ago on the HP touchscreen, where he actually made games that taught Taoism, the 4 arts of Taoism, rather than read the books themselves, which even modern Chinese scholars have trouble. The question is it digital humanities? And a famous diagram from about 10 years ago from the University of London says there's a methodological commons where all these fields of humanities need computational skills, resources, and power. My question, though, is whether it is really methodological, a study or critique of methods, or if it's just a raft of words up there. And another maybe opportunity for the humanists is, and this is 2010 article, but I think it was first mentioned about 10 years ago as well. If you're a humanities scholar, now you've got over 1 million books, and what do you do with them? So that's one issue for humanities scholars. And one other way of approaching it is, now you have social media and data, what can you do? And here on the right-hand side are academics using over 8 million tweets in New York, traced languages of the tweets using Google Translate and TrendsMap, and then gave the data back to the community. So the humanities scholars are now realizing They can trace their audience, they can trace new audiences, and they can do things with data which they couldn't do before almost instantly. But the even more interesting thing, from my point of view, is that tools like this, and also Texttool, allow you to actually create the tools without programming. And then maybe a more traditional example is paper machines, which is actually not just an interface to allow you to use Zotero or JSTOR references and actually search through, create catalogs, and create your own visual illustrations, but you can also extend it. So without knowing too much programming, you can actually build your own tool on top of the tool. So that, I think, is another mini revolution for humanities scholars. And another one, DH Commons, very simple idea. It's a bit like a speed dating digital humanities site. So if you have a project and you need people, you advertise it on the site. If you're a person who needs a project, you advertise on the site for free. And now they're combining with Dirt Bamboo and other groups to hopefully build a journal which will reference the tools and reference the projects and do so dynamically. And in Denmark, we're trying to get involved through Daria to build something similar. Another one, artshumanities.net, is based originally on scholarly ontologies, which is basically a 6-fold classification of what scholars do. And from that, through Daria, I've been talking to these people about maybe turning that into a registry of tools and methods, so that when you create a paper, you can extract the tools, dynamically link to them, see what people are referring to, and actually comment on the tools and which ones are better or worse. A bit like an extension of what PLOS1 does. The other thing about Digital Humanities is now anyone can build a website and a portal and build the user forums into that. And that's what we also hope to do at Digital Lab. And in terms of visualization, Neatline and OMECA allow you to create your own inbuilt dynamic visualizations without requiring too much programming skill. And also in terms of publishing, Scalar is very interesting. They had an interactive media journal for about 10 years using Flash. And all the disasters they learned, all the bad usability decisions, they created a platform to resolve that. So now, rather than offer a journal system, they offer a multimedia journal making system for free of charge. So it actually handles not just normal journal articles, but all sorts of multimedia ways of linking content and data. Even comic book artists are now saying, we could build an infinite comic using the internet. Of course, also Digital Lab and the large organizations are trying to create primers because there is just so much data out there and it's very hard to get scholars and students a starting point. So we need to build these primers like they're doing at Stanford. And just a quick question before I get to what Digital Lab is or does on digital humanities infrastructure. There's a famous article by Jeffrey Rockwell, a philosopher in Canada, who explains that research infrastructure is not research. I kind of agree, but he uses an example of roads. Roads are not infrastructure. I would say, yes, roading is infrastructure. It's only infrastructure when people use it and when people modify it. So for digital humanists, we don't build huge, large-scale infrastructure because we actually have more set projects, but we need to be able to get these people, once they've built the project, to make it reusable. To a coder like you, that's obvious, but it's not necessarily obvious to a humanities scholar. So we also need to build in a feedback system to these projects so that they are scalable. I'll give you an example. There's also a controversy in so-called digital humanities that most of it is actually managerial humanities, and the people who program and develop the projects, they don't get promoted, but the managers do. Of course, I want to avoid that, and I'll give you an example of what we're trying to do, and that's to build an imaginative infrastructure. So it's infrastructure which will be modified and allow people to still be creative within it. In this case, this is actually a farmer in America who wanted to build a barn for his horses in the winter, and he was told it would cost him thousands of dollars, lawyers and engineering fees. So what he did instead was completely free, and he didn't have to go through the council. Do you know what he did? Anyone seen this picture? Full-scale horses. So we want to build infrastructure like that. And of course, you could extend it as well with a couple more chairs and tables. So Digital Lab was set up in order to allow scholars to do this, to use what's already there. And we have most of the things in Denmark, but what I suggest as a non-Dane is that we still lack a communication system to show how it could be used. So the state, library, archives, museum organizations are brilliant, but we still lack a proper communication process. On the right-hand side, you'll see at our launch the 4 deans, or vice dean and the minister of science. And together we're trying to, well, this is new, the mission and the goals of Digital Lab. Basically, we say it's a national distributed research infrastructure. When the proposal went out, it was actually the infrastructure for Denmark, which is impossible. What I'm trying to get them to do more is a portal linking all these resources and being flexible across media. And the web portal will also include tools and forums that will actually all intercommunicate. And we also belong to Daria and Claren and Dashis and some other organizations. So our job is also to get news for Denmark and also influence at a European level. And there are currently three themes in Digital Lab, but we want to expand. There are Claren, the Vice Executive Director of Claren EU, is in Copenhagen, and Theme 1, which is Common Language Tools and Technology. Theme 2, Media Tools. NetLab is predominantly to do with web archives, preservation, but also involves some social media, including Facebook analysis, and they're in Aarhus. And Theme 3 is actually split between the other 2 universities, Aalborg and Southern Denmark, and they're actually a host of labs. So when you see the name Digital Lab, it sounds like a lab, but it's not central, it's not even distributed, it's a host of labs, particularly in terms of Theme 3. So they have virtual reality studios, they have social media, mobile media, they even have a van with a digital ethnography unit which goes around and videos people. So in their case in particular, they have a huge amount of research data in terms of video with storage, copyright, intellectual issues to resolve. We also, one of Theme 2, Per Oscar Hjort, has just won a HERA grant, so we hope to extend the themes as well. We're also talking to the State Archives of Denmark and also to the museums and art galleries. And at the advisory board level, we've just sending out invitations the next 2 weeks to 5 people across Europe to be on the advisory board. And also the libraries. So just recently, and there's always the plan, the State Library has joined, the National Royal Library as well will join, and each offer some very interesting tools as well as a huge amount of resources. In the case of the Danish State Library, MediaStream, I don't know if you've heard of it, but they have a huge amount of online information. It's a bit like LAM, but it lacks so far the online collaboration, annotation, editing tools, but they want to build it in. So if you're a researcher and you get access to it, then you can view all the TV, video, and advertising for decades and decades. So it's a very interesting interface project as well. On the right-hand side, I think I can show this because it is online. It's from an interview with the Hydra developer. With Stanford and other universities, the Royal Library is developing a Fedora-based system, which is actually not just a repository system for books and so forth. It's also for audiovisual material, but they're trying to develop flexible interfaces as well on top of it. So we hope to combine with both our new partners to see how humanities scholars can embed that within their work. How do you cite from it? How do you collaborate on it? And in the case of audiovisual material in Denmark, how can you show more than 17 seconds? So we have some issues, but some very interesting opportunities there. So we had our launch last year, and Patrick Svensson from Umeå in Sweden, who just had a wonderful conference in December in Umeå from HomeLab. He gave a talk about different types of digital humanities, and as a language scholar, what it was like to build virtual worlds. We had actually 4 speakers, including Lorna Hughes, who's unusual being a professor in library studies, and we also had Claren and Daria presenting, and a speaker from Norway, Palmer from Oslo, and also from Aalto, Lily Diaz-Commonen, explained the breadth and the richness of digital humanities and some of the challenges. Claren was approved at the start of last year. Daria is hoping to be approved by mid-year. So Daria is actually digital research infrastructure for arts and humanities. It's a bit more widespread than Claren. Hopefully will one day be as well organized. And ALLC in HERA gave us a grant, and I'm going to organize a workshop from that. We've applied with York for a digital heritage center infrastructure between, I think it's 4 universities across Europe in terms of digital archaeology and digital heritage. Paris, a consortium approached us for a foundation exchange grant with American universities, which is still under consideration. And we applied for an Erasmus application and a summer school in Göttingen for next year with 4 other universities. There's also a RESOR application in Horizon, well, to actually look at web preservation across a huge number of European countries. The other thing is we just had a transatlantic debate in Aalborg, which was between Jeffrey Snapp of Harvard and John Norton of Cambridge. And then the Cultural Heritage Creative Archives and Tools workshop at the end of next month. We have infrastructure representatives from ERI, I think Sindari, Daria, Europeana, and so forth actually debate what are the problems and the ways in which archives are creatively and scholastically used, and can we influence EU policy, because the archaeologists in particular want to have a more unified voice. And then we have, Daria has asked us to host a meeting, the general meeting of up to 100 people on the 5th and 6th of September, and hopefully the night before we can actually talk about, in Denmark, the actual copyright and research data questions, which are extremely challenging and interesting for us. And then next year we hope to have a conference on digital humanities. So we're a bit busy. So why DigHum Lab? I'm still creating this list, and we have to increase it. And it's also an issue for Daria, is how to promote itself and show why it should be used. So we want to employ staff to build scholarly tools for interfaces to the existing and new archives. We hope to increase the influence on policy. We hope to develop online communities, because there's some amazing new online community building tools, but we want to teach people to build them themselves. We want to share the content across. If we could have multilingual descriptions, that would actually help our Daria contribution. And of course, we still want to be involved at a European level. So of the two infrastructures that we're currently involved with directly, Daria, you might not know much about. It's in France, but also in Netherlands and Germany, between 3 directors. It gets €4 million a year, I think, mostly in kind. Norway is, I think, was an observer, but not currently joined. I think we're the only Nordic partner at the moment, and I'm responsible for research and teaching engagement in Daria. And there are many things that we're trying to do. I might give one example later on. Clarin, I'm sorry I wasn't prepared to talk about Clarin, because it was presented last year very well, and I thought it would be presented again. But it's about language, material and corpora, interfaces and tools. And as I said, Denmark is a major partner in this. So, and one example of what we do want to do, I just call it an ecosystem at the moment, to give you an idea of a different way of looking at infrastructure. We want to be able to combine, for example, the projects from DH Commons, the methods from Nedima, which is another infrastructure that's based also with membership in Denmark, and the tools, for example, from Dirt Bamboo, which is an online directory of tools, and publication systems like Open Edition, which is French-based and just received €7 million. So already you can have, I think it's 300 types of journals. You can build your own journal blog system, share it as a community blog, publish it as a book. And Daria, of course, in terms of hosting, because there's very, very large hosting server infrastructures, for example, TG Adonis in France, who are part of Daria. And then we want to incorporate it with the teachers and the students. So imagine PLOS1, which is one of the top 20 science publishers now, I think, in terms of journals. Imagine not just the review system they have, which is quite revolutionary. Imagine also the user community, which has grown up around it. Then imagine how you could integrate that into teaching, and how you could dynamically update all of that. That's what we're trying to do now between all of these organizations. And at a very grassroots level as well, the Royal Library and the State Museum had not this, but an earlier one, a hack for culture, where they said, we have all these maps, we have all this data, we have no programmers, here's some free pizza for 24 hours, build us some applications. So if you go to nearsomething.com, for example, on your iPhone, it will show you how close you are to all the cultural heritage monuments in Denmark. And that was all done in 24 hours. It's a brilliant idea. Bring in the programmers and the humanists working together. Lithuania did this last month, and they were given the Europeana library interface. It's very good from a research point of view, because up to 2.3 billion is spent in research grants on Europeana in the next couple of years. So it's very good to work on Europeana data from a research point of view. And what they did, the 3 finalist groups were this one on the left-hand side. In 20 hours, they built what I call a quiz mob. So basically, for any data, they build up quizzes, and then using the tracker on your iPhone or your Android, you can be at a bus stop or at a computer store, and you start playing a quiz, top 10 questions quiz, and you can play it against complete strangers. So it's a very clever way of integrating Europeana data, and they won the Public Engagement Prize. That's them on the right-hand side. In the middle there is an image recognition scheme, and it actually it's any sort of corpora. It will actually work out all related images in terms of text and try to break them down into a family for you. So it's image recognition rather than text recognition. And the last one, which also won a prize, is an instant query window. So you don't need to know any programming, you just create your own query in the window using 5 questions, and it'll automatically download what you want from Europeana. And these projects, just in 20 hours, shows you what you can do once you start using students and pizza and a bit of prize money. So we'd like to do that as well. And hackathons and also that camps where you bring humanists and IT people together. Because last year at Sheffield, they asked me when I gave a presentation, how do we get more humanities students learning programming? And I said, why can't you get more programmers also doing humanities? And they went, oh. So I think we need to communicate across. I don't think it's a cultural divide. So my takeaway points now, the sharing, the making, and the linking is actually quite new for traditional humanities scholars. And secondly, the audience, the connection to a potential audience is huge. And thirdly, we now have to work out what is cutting edge in terms of research infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so gentlemen, please come and take your seats. So I'll try in the meantime to see if I can try to sum up the what I think cannot be summed up. So I observe that that from the beginning there is a huge difference in the point of departure in terms of technology ability. So from Stefan, we got an example that there indeed are humanitarian scholars who know what they're doing in terms of hardcore supercomputing and so forth. On the other hand, there are also many that don't. So the variation is huge here. Then we heard about that actually there is a huge amount of organizations and projects and groupings that more or less do the same thing, at least overlap to a large degree, which you are fighting with, solving somewhat the same task. And this is mind-boggling to try to organize this. And then, for example, from Eric, we hear that there are just as many projects and, may I say, tools, if not infrastructures, which are doing a lot of different things. So the scope of e-infrastructures and the challenges within the humanitarians is mind-boggling. So where do we attack it? I set myself the task that what we need to do here is to somehow answer the question how to make an infrastructure provider within research infrastructure useful. Like my organization, what is it we should do if we are only allowed to do infrastructure and within research? So bear in mind, as far as I understand, that excludes funding for specific project this or project that. It has to be something which is not an instrument, but indeed an infrastructure. So where to put the focus? We can do that on technology, we can do it on politics, organization, we can do it on some kind of consensus building. I don't know if you agree if that is where we should try to be looking. So you can prove me wrong. So where should we start? Stefan, I'll start with you. Where is the challenge?
Well, I would suggest, I guess this works okay, I would suggest to you this notion of HPC for the masses, where in my presentation I focused on...
So the long tail of, not the high-end users.
I focused on computation, but obviously the data management, so I knew the other presentations would be much more data-centric. They go hand in hand. And so expanding the sort of traditional capability pyramid with an entry-level HPC layer.
Entry-level, you mean get rid of the Linux command prompt? User-friendliness.
Yes.
Useful software.
That's a big part of it. The culture, the dialogue, the interfaces, the policies.
Okay.
HPC is for everyone who computes and potentially wants to compute
so
on
you say
on a larger scale.
The entry, the learning curve or the entry threshold is too high.
That is probably the case.
Okay. Yeah. Hans?
Yeah. The way you put it makes me think about the relationship that we as SND has to SNCC, because actually I think it's a very good arrangement we have where the agreement is that the muscle in the background, that's SNCC. They know how to deal with big things. And the researcher-friendly front end in humanities and social science is supposed to be S&D. So we keep the nitty-gritty away from SNCC, and SNCC provides the big muscle that that they're really good at. And I think that probably...
But that's just saying that SNCC is fine? There's no need to change anything?
Well, you can always develop, but I know so far I think I would vouch for SNCC so far. Yes, we have a good relationship there.
But then how to deal with your problem of all these organizations doing the same? So that's actually not SNCC's business; it's your own.
I'm afraid so. At least that's how I see it. That belongs to the nitty-gritty thing.
But that doesn't answer my question. How do I become useful? In this case, my colleague Jakob in Sweden, or on the Nordic level. How does an infrastructure provider give you something useful? What you're answering is we should just wait until you've sorted out your shop.
No. They are providing something useful. They do provide computational platform. They do provide data resources and whatever. So I think they are useful.
Okay.
And I'm very happy for them to do more of that.
So your answer is do more of what you're already doing?
I think it is, yes.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Eric?
You've got some idea when they come to your site. You've got a better idea when they download. You've got an even better idea when they upload a better tool. So we need to track people. We need to know what they're doing and where, and then we need to link it.
But how can I or we, infrastructure providers like yourself, how can we assist?
Well,
What should we be doing?
In our case, we actually need to build links to what is out there and explain how it can be used. That's what I was trying to say. We are missing some communication aspects. We need more examples, we need more exemplars, we need more workshops, we need different people from different fields with different questions working together.
So consolidating.
Yeah, consolidating it.
Could I say that's all for all three of you? I mean, in terms of you, it's trying to consolidate the understanding of the difference between the different high end and the tail and so on, and give the right service to the right groups. So for now, it seems like a mess. You expect the complete novice to have success with the Linux prompt, and that's unfair. On the other hand, there are many that know what they're doing, but they're not helped either. So, and in your case, you have all these organizations, too many of them, doing the same thing, and you need to sort out your shop, and you just want more of what SNCC already is giving you. So you also need consolidation somehow.
Yeah, I can say that, yeah.
And you with your millions of tools, too many, unorganized.
Can I give a better example? So my research used to be using virtual reality and game engines to build archaeology sites. The best example I ever saw was in Rome, where they had the 40 top leading virtual heritage projects in the forum in Rome, and the most popular exhibit was a talking fish. And it was supposed to be about classical architecture and art history.
Okay.
So they got all this money, and they'd never worked out if users wanted it, or could use it, or understood it.
Okay, yeah. So maybe we can we can invite for some questions. Maybe somebody would like to disagree or agree or underline something. So what is it that the national infrastructure providers, which, yes, we're not the only ones on the field. There are other infrastructure providers, also national, but the ones like where I come from, which originates pretty much from natural science, and we very much want to be useful to the humanitarians. So what is it that we need to do better, or just do, which we didn't do before? Yes, sir. Don't you have the one of this? It takes too much time to bring it back. Maybe this one we can share.
One keyword that I would like to mention about what's needed is facilitation. What I mean is that there are all these possibilities, wonderful possibilities. There, we can use enormous amounts of compute cycles. There's lots of storage, but in the end, the research groups who want to actually use that, who want to build on that, have to discover a lot of things themselves. They have to figure it out, how to apply for things, how to go to their administration. In some cases, they have to involve their local IT department to get to the NREN. For example, as we recently experienced, we were going to offer a service through the National Identity Federation. We had to go through our local department, who actually turned out had never done this before. So if things like IT departments, in fact, are bottlenecks rather than facilitators, can we have another model for facilitating the use of these resources? I mean, it's a little bit what Stefan also said, that is, you know, if you're going to offer HPC to the masses, you need to facilitate it.
Okay, but please do suggest a new IT department structure.
I think, well, the easiest in our case would have been, and it's in fact also what Stefan experienced, is that there was a closeness of the people who really knew what they were doing. They were like in the building next door. And that is sort of an important issue, I think. And, you know, if we find that, for example, we need support to actually even talk to our own IT department, who is going to talk to the NREN? Why can't the NREN have a person who works in the research group locally and facilitates for a while? I mean, it doesn't need to be permanent.
Right, so the infrastructure providers are not engaged enough.
Exactly.
They have too far from the users.
They are too far. They have to come closer to the users. They have to actually be physically located in a research group for a month or so and solve their problems.
So actually, it's not really infrastructure as a hardware thing. It's more close user support you're looking for.
Exactly.
Okay.
Can I say two quick things about that? Sheffield asked me how they keep their IT support staff, who are quite specialized. And I said, why don't you give them 1 day a week where they can do their own thing? Like Google gives you 1 day a week to develop, and then they take your ideas if they're any good. So you can actually embed them. And the second thing, which we're trying to do as well, is the people who build these things often cannot get promoted because they can't cite these things. So as academics, we need to help them in the system. So that was all I had to say.
But okay, we can go with the idea that user support is also infrastructure, at least when this support is about the infrastructure. So, user support I hear. Anything else? Any other suggestions? I think we should got Goodman, like 5 minutes more. Yeah. Then we will close it. So, no? Okay. Yeah.
Could I piggyback on Konrad's facilitation? I think is a very useful term here, and it covers many of the facets I had in mind. So advanced user support. So as an infrastructure provider, it's not just about making available the cycles and the terabytes. It's also about providing the services and the assistance, maybe even the outreach, and as part of that, embracing diversity. So there are the classic user disciplines, and there are many others who are in the process of, I think, becoming dependent on this kind of infrastructure, and I think also becoming productive users. And so embracing that diversity could mean getting representatives from various disciplines on boards or allocation committees. So increased diversity.
Good point.
Yeah, okay. Maybe we should say that's it. Any more last comments? Yeah, so we should focus on user support for the long tail, yeah? Consolidate. Okay, well, thank you much. Oh, I have a little present for you.